morning session is ADM Joseph Prueher. He's a Naval Academy grad, a former commandant. He excelled as a carrier-based attack pilot and commanded at all levels in the Navy, ultimately serving as Commander-in-Chief Pacific from 1996 to 1999. I think it would also be worth mentioning that he was a test pilot. There's pilots and there's test pilots, and he was qualified in over 50 type model series aircraft. Following 35 years of active duty, he then went on to serve as the U.S. Ambassador to China from 1999 to 2001. Currently, he's the James R. Schlesinger Distinguished Professor at the Miller Center at UVA, as well as advisor to the Stanford Harvard Apprentice Defense Project. It's my honor to introduce Distinguished Naval Officer and Naval Aviator, ADM Joe Prueher.
Good morning to you, and it's great to be here with you this morning. It's just wonderful to see so many midshipmen volunteer to be over here this morning. It's a real pleasure. And I would like to echo what Pete talked about, as those that are out there providing for the common defense and are providing us this safe harbor where we can be today and get a chance to talk. Your introduction was very flattering. If you were to ask my wife, Suzanne, what my identity is, she would say, well, he always thinks about himself as being a naval aviator. And I think that's right. And maybe it's just wishful thinking as I get older, and my hair has actually been this tint for quite some time, but I still relish the days of flying. It was great to see President Bush. He looks good. He's one of the remarkable people of our time, and for those of you that are in uniform in the audience, he was about under 20 years old when he did his Navy flying. He was 19 years old when he was doing his Navy flying, and it actually got shot down, so he's younger than many of you. My purpose this morning is to try to set a climate for the day. I have a lot of advice on how to do that, but what I really want to do is talk about some of the people that are here, that are going to be here. We've got former Secretary of the Navy, John Lehman will be here. He has his normal amount of reverence, which he will bring to you, and have a chance to chat. Some real heroes. Bob Dunn will be here later on. He's famous for talking about aircraft carriers, because carriers get talked about and they are actually a proxy for a lot of things in naval aviation, but carriers exist to fly airplanes from. And that's a point that will be made later on today. We need to keep that in mind. Jim Lovell, Charlie Bolden, Wendy Lawrence, Bob Kirby are here. They have a different perspective from space of looking at our Earth and seeing how it works. Dave Arkisel, I told him I would embarrass him this morning. Dave has been a Navy pilot. He's been a new carrier skipper. He now works in the procurement process, where I think Dave in the aviation part is the savior of a process that is very cumbersome sometimes. He's a person that brings a lot of good sense to that, and we're glad to have him. Barney Rubel, whose name I see listed over there as Professor Rubel. Now he's a War College guy. I remember him much better when he was a LSO in the Air Wing, an extraordinary LSO that got us back aboard the ship some nights in the North Atlantic when the deck was pitching plus or minus 40 feet with about 70 knots of wind over the deck, and easy with it, Kay. And he'd get us aboard the ship. So I like him better than most of the rest of the people here. But what we have to look at today is naval aviation, which has adapted a great deal over time. We've gone from props to jets. We've gone from when I was a rookie in aviation we talked about the numbers of bombs we could put in the vicinity of a target, and now we put 1 or 2 precisely on the target, and it's created a tremendous increase in efficiency in what we're able to do in the attack phase of aviation. We've had anti-submarine warfare to match the threats that have gone along, but essentially the core of the mission of naval aviation is the same, and that's to provide air power where it is needed. This gets into the carrier argument, which will ensue later on today. We'll talk about that. But as a commander, when you need air power, you don't care where it's sourced. It could come from an aircraft carrier, it could come from land-based. You don't care if it's light blue Air Force or Navy or Marine Corps. What you want is air power there. But what the carriers allow us to do is to put that in places of the world where we can't do it otherwise. And it's a vital piece of providing critical mass that we look at. But the key to it, for anyone that ever goes to spend time on a carrier, spend time on a B-3 base, spend time at a helicopter base, a Marine base, they see a lot of gee whiz things with airplanes and catapults and arresting gear and electronics. But what one comes away with every time, it's the people that make it. And what we have in naval aviation largely is people that love to fly and to maintain airplanes, and that's just vital. Now, what I'd like to do to move on to the next step where you can really talk to people that are going to get into detail is tell 4 stories. And I'll try to do them quick. Try to do them fairly quickly. The first one is a name that's familiar to many of you, particularly if you ever fly through Chicago, and it's Butch O'Hare. Butch O'Hare was a Navy pilot. He graduated from the Naval Academy in 1937. In those days, graduates went, if you're going into aviation, you still went 2 years to the surface Navy, and he went to a battleship for 2 years. Then he got his wings in 1940. The pipeline for him to get his wings was 6 months at that time, a little longer than that now. And then he joined a squadron, and a couple of other names in that squadron were Jimmy Thatch, Flatley. It was a pretty heavy-duty squadron, and they had a lot of emphasis on tactics. They worked aviation tactics. They focused on gunnery. And Butch O'Hare came into this squadron and started to learn those things. Thatch was the skipper, and he invented the famous Thatch weave, which was a process of crossing back and forth. They were flying the Grumman, the F-4F Wildcat, and you couldn't see out the back. So what they did is they just had a weave where they could always check their 6 and always know what was going on, and Jim Thatch invented that. They also invented the high side gunnery pass, so that they would make a high side pass in attacking other aircraft, and that took the tail gunner of Japanese Betty aircraft out of the picture because they couldn't shoot up. They would shoot back, but they couldn't shoot up. And they came up with those tactics. Well, this paid off for Butch O'Hare on one flight. And they were flying off to Lexington in 1942 in the Pacific. And there are a complex array of details that go with this, but I won't go into all of them. But it ended up that Admiral Yamamoto had sent a wave of aircraft into attack, and what had happened is the entire defenses of the Lexington and the battle group had gone in one direction. And then they picked up 9 inbound Japanese bombers coming in from another direction. And the only people that were there left to defend the Lexington were Butch O'Hare and his wingmen. They launched. O'Hare had in his guns, they had 6 .50 caliber guns on the airplane, on the Wildcat. He had 34 seconds worth of firing available to him. That was a full kit, 34 seconds. Well, he launched, and they intercepted the Japanese bombers coming in, and with that 34 seconds worth of firing, he shot down 5 of them. and drove the others off, and the Lexington was reserved from that. For that, Butch O'Hare got the Medal of Honor. This was, remember this was 1942, 5 years after he graduated from the Naval Academy. He then, also in 1942, relieved Jimmy Thatch as the squadron CO. And then the next year, 1943, 6 years out of the Naval Academy, he became the air wing commander of his air wing. And that was a 3-squadron air wing at that time. But that was 6 years out of the Naval Academy. It was CAG. Nowadays, CAGs are about 22 years out of the Naval Academy before they do that. I'm very glad to be there in that job. But it's a tribute to a person like Butch O'Hare, and then they named the airport Chicago after him in 1949. He was lost doing night tactics in 1943 when he was the air wing commander, and so he never came back from the flight. The next person I want to talk about is not a Naval Academy graduate, but a Marine pilot that died about 2 years ago named Jim Sweat. Jim Sweat was also in World War II, and at age 22, Jim Sweat was in Guadalcanal. The pipeline he went through, he joined the reserves in 1941. And in 42, he was in Guadalcanal. The pipeline to get through flight training when he went was 4.5 months. So he was a real nugget when he came out to get to Guadalcanal. He showed up, age 22, his first day of combat. This, again, Admiral Yamamoto had launched nearly 400 aircraft, more than launched against Pearl Harbor, against Guadalcanal and Tulagi in the Pacific Theater. They launched, our Marines there launched everything they had. Jim Sweat got in the air, and in 15 minutes he had shot down 7 Japanese aircraft. It's first day of combat. Think of that. And my friend, I've got a very close friend, Howard DeCastro, who's a former Marine pilot, great guy. Howard's from Lusk, Wyoming, and has a simple way of saying things. He said, well, think of Sweat. You know, when he got back to that night, they're sitting around the tent having dinner, and said, well, how'd your day go? And so that's pretty much how you can think about this guy. But Jim Sweat, and then look, he got the Medal of Honor for that flight, and the nation would not let him fly again. They wanted to preserve the Medal of Honor winners and keep him and not put him at risk in the Korean War. He resigned from the Marine Corps because of that. Then he re-entered the Marine Corps and retired as a Marine Corps Reserve Colonel in 1970. The next one is a little different, and this one is a little closer to home for me. I want to talk about Shane Osborne, who was a multi-motor pilot. I don't know if that name rings a bell, but he was the pilot of the EP-3 that on April Fool's Day in 2001 was hit by a Chinese F-8 fighter in the Sea of Japan off of Hainan Island. And what happened, interestingly, the Chinese pilot's name was Wang Wei. We didn't laugh about that much at the outset, but now it seems a little humorous. But Wang Wei was a guy flying out of the South China Sea that intercepted a lot of our flights. And I'll talk for a moment about him because we had videos of him. One, he got rendezvoused and he was holding up his email address so that the aircrew could see as he rendezvoused on the P-3s and sometimes the rivet joint, the 707 type aircraft. He would rendezvous and he held up his email address. We have other pictures of him giving the international peace sign to the crew. And but anyway, Wang Wei on this day in 2001 made 2 rendezvous on the aircraft, and he had a wingman who was back over on the rear quarter. And then the 3rd rendezvous was too high, and he hit the EP-3, a very heavy, maxed out weight airplane, going along at max endurance, 180 knots, 22,000 feet, and he couldn't control his closure rate, and he hit the wingtip of the airplane, hit the #1 engine, the left outboard engine, knocked the nose cone off the airplane, and damaged the #2 engine. And then the Chinese F-8 broke up, long way ejected, but he was never seen again. Well, the EB-3, as a result of the damage that it had, what I just described, plus the right aileron was locked in the full-up position. Pretty awkward. Well, Shane Osborne did a remarkable feat of flying. There are 22,000 feet. The EP-3 went into 130 degrees angle of bank, the near inverted position, and it lost 8,000 feet in 30 seconds, and then sort of regained control of the airplane by the time they got down to 8,000 feet. Shane Osborne had gained control of the aircraft. It went on to land at Hainan Island. Well, this feat of airmanship, he was a lieutenant at the time. A lieutenant with a crew of 34, launched out of Kadena, doing signals reconnaissance along the South China Sea in that part of the world, very sensitive part of the world. A huge amount of responsibility, but usually these flights are just that. They're just grinding along, you drinking coffee, they're kind of, but he did an amazing feat of airmanship to save that crew and to save the aircraft. The rest of the story is political, which doesn't have so much to do with naval aviation. I was pretty interested in it, but it's a tremendous feat of airmanship. A very young man, Shane Osborne. The last story I'm going to tell, because Admiral Daly's, he's just glancing at his watch and he's not tapping it yet, so I'm good for me to go on here. But the last story I want to talk about is the people that maintain the airplanes. It'll be very important to all of us. And this is a little more personal. When I had an air wing, my Rio was a guy named Tank McNamara. We flew a Turkey, an F-14, down from Oceana down to Cherry Point. It was late October. It was cold. Toward the afternoon, we were debriefing an exercise with Marines down at Cherry Point, and that we'd just done that day off the coast. And we finished our brief, went out to jump in the airplane and run back up to Oceana. I kicked the nose tire, and the bead had come loose on the nose tire, so they had to change the tire. Well, you can envision this. They're eager to get rid of me, get out of there. A couple of Marine generals are hanging around, and other people. And it's late in the afternoon. It's getting dark. The Marines are fixing the nose tire, and they bring up the start carts with the light shining on it. Well, as we milled around there for a little bit, it's getting chilly. I walked over to the gunnery sergeant who was overseeing this exercise and getting the nose tire changed, and I said, "Gunny, is there anything I can do to help?" And he looked up at me and he said, "Yes, sir, if you're just staying out of my light." And I've always remembered this because he wasn't being disrespectful at all. It was a leadership lesson for me. Is when you've got people that are working on things and they're doing it very well, lead, follow, or get out of the way. And in this case, it was get out of the way. And so that is it's a lesson, one about Marines and other about aviation and the people that maintain the airplanes. So I think this is something that we very much need to keep in mind. So these are stories about the people of naval aviation. I haven't talked much about helicopters. There are marvelous tales there too, but naval aviation provides the front line of what's gone on for 100 years. It's in a period of adapting now. It's been in a period of adapting for a long time. There have been a lot of big changes in it. And I thank you all for coming out. I think you're going to talk to some people and get a chance to have questions and answers with people who are remarkably good in the procurement process, looking at the future and also looking at the history of naval aviation. I hope you have a great day. Now, Pete, I've I got a little time, or I've got plenty of time, but I think the program has a little time for Q's and A's if you have any questions of me, and then we can move on. Okay, I've got the answers, yeah. We've got a ringer. All right, thank you, Pete.
Superb remarks. Could you talk a little bit about your view? There's so much culture and personality to naval aviation. You've given us some excellent examples of what it means, the man and the machine. As we look ahead to maybe more unmanned, what's your view of that, and how should we look at that as you know, there's a lot of potential naval aviators in here. Get your view on that, if I could.
I won't repeat the question because I think you all got that about the future of aviation with unmanned vehicles. First, the personality of the machine. There is a lot of the cultural aspect of naval aviation is something that's very valuable, and we all promise not to tell all we know. And but the aircraft are just machines. You know, we get where it's like you have a car that you really like. You know, you get where you like it and you ascribe a personality to it. Well, airplanes, we do that with airplanes too. After they bring you back safely a few times, you like that aspect of airplanes as well, or helicopters, or anything that you fly. But they still are just machines, and so the people make them work. As we get into the UAV discussion, I'd like to answer it in two parts. One is a very complex one, and it's not just about naval aviation, but as we have standoff weapons, tomahawk weapons, drones, where we do not put our national treasure, our people at risk, it makes our bosses more adventuresome in getting involved in frays to which, if we were putting ourselves at risk, we might not get involved. This is a piece that we have to think through about drones, UAVs, all of those things. We need to think that through. That's complicated. The more to what I think your question is, are we going to have in the near future have a carrier air wing that's all UAVs, or have from what I know, and there are people here that can talk more technically about it, I think we'll have some more of them, and they are marvelous, and there are a lot of places that we'd rather not go, and there are things where they've got a lot of endurance and can, the obvious advantage of having UAVs and not having to have life support systems and stuff like that in aircraft. They can do it. But I think from what I know and from talking to people in industry, and as we look ahead, we are still a very long way, in fact not in the foreseeable future, of having all UAVs. We'll have more of them, and we should. There's some missions they're good at.
Time for one more question. Sure, one.
The question was, how does naval aviation interact with the other communities in the Navy and the Marine Corps? And the answer to that is a lot better than we used to. There was a time where that really changed, I think, in the early 80s foremost, when the communities worked sort of separately. And I think what occurred in the 80s, and Secretary Lehman had a lot to do with that, is the green door to the intel community opened up so that operators got access to intelligence. Goldwater-Nichols occurred in 1986, which was a forcing function to work together. And that was joint service. The Marine Corps had always done combined arms and done that very well. And I think the Navy, Naval Aviation now integrates very closely with the others. I went to a change of command recently to a guy who was a former Blue Angel and just gave up command of a Hornet squadron. And the whole discussion, Bill Gordy was the change of command speaker, but the whole discussion was about the support of troops on the ground and how they did that. And that was their mission. That's what they did. They flew the sorties that Admiral Daly was talking about. Their issue was supporting troops on the ground. So I think the integration, we can't afford not to integrate, so we do it quite well right now. Thanks for the question.